Welcome, everyone. This is Project Evident, and you are joining us for Equitable AI for Outcomes, moving from principles to practice, or as we've been calling this internally, welcome to the teach-in. Project Evident was founded about 10 years ago, and it was through a shared productive dissatisfaction that Kelly Fitzsimmons and myself felt around how data and evidence was being used as tools for judgment as opposed to tools for learning. Now, Kelly and I had an interesting shared history. We had been seated in funders, so we were both program officers at a point in our career, and we had been practitioners, nonprofit practitioners. So we had seen both sides of the nonprofit sector. And what we understood was that the burning questions of leadership, of frontline staff, of program officers, and most importantly, the community were being left unanswered because we were using data and evidence in judgment instead of learning. So Project Evident was founded on those principles of productive dissatisfaction as a way to systemically change how data and evidence would be used in the sector, to move more towards research and development, ongoing learning, and really the questions of people who are on the front lines and the community animating what was going to get studied and what was going to get learned. Now, flash forward 5 years, and we're in the depths of COVID. Now, generative AI is not even been released to public yet, but we partnered with the Gates Foundation. And the Gates Foundation partnered with us around trying to understand how could ML, or machine learning, and non-generative AI, what were the real opportunities for that in the social and education sector? And what we learned has continued to animate our work over the last 5 years. We had 3 core realizations. The first realization, AI was going to be a force multiplier for outcomes. That was evidently clear to us. Current evaluation practices, Kelly and I knew, forced everybody into looking at data in terms of a bell curve. Well, a bell curve means everybody to the left and the right of that apex actually isn't getting the best program for them. So the way we were using evaluation and data was actually forcing practitioners and educators into a one-size-fits-most program model delivery. But what we saw with ML, machine learning, and AI, artificial intelligence, is that its ability to analyze data quickly, to find patterns, was going to allow people to customize program delivery and education to the person that they were sitting with. And we knew that that could actually extraordinarily change the trajectory of outcomes in our sector. So you can imagine we were incredibly excited when we learned this. So that first learning, AI, it's going to be a force multiplier for outcomes. Now, our second realization had a little more caution around it. We knew that this was going to create an extraordinary societal shift. Now, one thing that Kelly and I had experienced together, because we've been in the sector for 20 years, we actually met on a project to bring the internet to nonprofits. So we had already seen how the internet had revolutionized the way nonprofits work, but it totally revolutionized the way society and the way business was organized. So when we looked at artificial intelligence and machine learning, we knew this was going to usher in a massive new societal shift. And we thought it was incredibly important that the attendant laws and policies would benefit from the perspective of the social and education sector. I mean, again, we were in the depths of COVID, but we were already reeling from the fact that there was no table that anyone had been invited to talk about social media and the impacts that that could have on society. So we thought it was incredibly important that our communities were represented at the table and that they advocated to be at those tables. But the reality was, educators and nonprofits were not going to advocate to be at the table around laws and policies and norms around how AI is brought into our society unless they had a point of view. And the only way they were going to have a point of view was if they played with AI. So our second core realization was that we had to foster AI play. So AI is a force multiplier for outcomes, foster AI play. Now, the last insight that we had is that if history repeated itself in terms of how technology was brought into our sector, that would just be the cool kids that had access, right? It would come to organizations that could provide wonderful brand halo to large corporations or organizations that already had relationships with large foundations. So we knew that we had to create a big tent and everyone had to be invited. AI is a force multiplier for outcomes, foster AI play, and everybody is invited. So over the last 5 years, that's animated our work. That's why we have a big room with all of you involved. Now, we have, over the last 5 years, we've worked with over 150 funders, nonprofits, and educators. We've led research, we've done case studies and podcasts, we've built tools, we've built frameworks, we've convened communities of practice, all with the goal of learning with and from each other. We know this is an all teach, all learn moment, and that knowledge is going to be created in community, not by experts who are behind closed doors telling you what works. We wanted to really work with folks who were experimenting on the ground and be a part of that experimentation. Now, this would have been impossible without the curious and dedicated colleagues of Project Evident. In particular, today, I want to call out the two folks who've been most dedicated to the Equitable AI Adoption Project, and that is Laura Schoonmaker and Sarah Kelley. Sarah has been leading the Equitable AI Adoption Project. Now, when one of your goals is everybody's invited, you meet fellow travelers along the way. And one of those fellow travelers was Vic Vucic. When I talked about that first partnership with Gates, that research, it led to our very first community of practice back in 2022. And when Vic joined the Gates Foundation, this project, the Equitable AI Adoption Project, was the very first grant that he sponsored and championed. So it's because of Vic and the Gates Foundation that everybody was invited to today. So Vic, thank you for your partnership, for your productive dissatisfaction, for your willingness to play with us, and of course, your friendship. Vic Vucic.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. And I'll just start by thanking Project Evident for their amazing work in jumping in on this about 2.5 years ago, feet first. I think this work is incredibly important. And thank you all for joining us here today. I'm just going to take a brief moment to kind of set a little bit of the context of why, basically where this came from and why I think this is just such incredible and important work, both for the field, for the sector, and to really get to impact. So let me just share my screen real quick for a second here. You'll bear with me. There we go. And all right. So really, AI, had its moment about 2.5 years ago, with Gen AI in particular. And, there's a real flurry there. And all of a sudden, it both kind of captured everyone's imagination. Suddenly, like what's possible was transforming and changing. And then at the same time, there was just a proliferation of solutions. Oh my gosh, there were solutions everywhere. Solutions for new insights from data, recommendations for teachers, AI tutors, personalized learning, interactive simulations, all these things, just solutions coming at me everywhere. And, one thing is I am in this privileged position. I work at a foundation, and so I get to see a lot of these. Everyone comes to kind of share and show. So I'm seeing dozens of solutions left and right, all these AI products happening and what's possible and the transformations and solutions here and there. And then all of a sudden it happened. I saw the solution that was going to lead to equitable outcomes and access in education and even in the social sector more broadly. And it was just clear as day. You know what that solution was called? It was called the people. It's the people and the institutions that they're in, the organizations that they're in, that are still going to make or break whether we get to impact and equitable outcomes for all. As much as we love the new solution, the hot widget, the hot product, evidence shows really that it's the implementation, the supports, the people, and how that gets rolled out that actually has a profound impact. And I'm going to step you through a little bit to illustrate why that really matters so much. I'm going to start with a story. So back in my day, there was a very famous chess player. Some of you may remember this. Garry Kasparov. By many, he's considered the greatest chess player ever. And in the 1990s, IBM had their leading AI system. It was called Deep Blue. And every year or two, he would play Deep Blue, and it was a big moment. And Kasparov would always beat it. And then all of a sudden in 1997, Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov. And the world was in shock. Even Gary was in shock. It was a real moment, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, the machines are taking over. You know, it was really kind of shook the ground. But actually, Gary was quite brilliant. And so what he did was he actually reflected, and he said, we need to reinvent the game of chess for this modern world. We need to really transform it. And he came up with new rules and a way to play chess called freestyle chess. And so freestyle chess was basically the same rules as chess. And you have your time limits, but it ends up during your allotted time, you can use any resources. You can use computers, social networks, you can phone a friend, you can do whatever you want, and then you have to make your decision and make your move. And so people started playing freestyle chess, and then it kind of culminated in 2005. There was a huge tournament with thousands of chess players. This is all online. So there's thousands of chess players, hundreds of grandmasters playing this open kind of freestyle chess tournament. And everyone was just thrilled and excited to see which grandmaster was going to win using technology. And then you know who ended up winning? It was Zach S. You know, that world famous chess player, Zach S. It ends up Zach S was 3 amateurs from New Hampshire. It was a team, and they actually struggled in the beginning to almost not even qualify for their regional tournament, but they were using Pentium computers in those days. And they actually used the technology in a really profound way. And so again, Gary kind of reflected on this and came up with what I find to be a very kind of elegant equation around this, that expert human with technology, but with an inferior process of using that technology, was actually defeated by novice human using technology with a superior process on how they use the technology. So it was really the process of how they use the technology that was the big differentiator. And it actually enabled novices to perform at literally the world's best level, which was pretty profound and incredible. When we go to education, where I spend a lot of my time, there's also a notion called the 5% problem. This is becoming more known now. My colleague in the field, Lawrence Holt, who wrote a beautiful article, he dove into this and analyzed it. You can actually Google 5% problem and Lawrence Holt. And he dove into the research around education technology and studies where we have products, ed tech products and solutions that have gotten wonderful effect sizes, pretty impressive and quite effective. And the studies always said, we have a large effect size when implemented as intended. And he actually double clicked that. What does when implemented as intended mean? And it ends up, and how many of the study's participants actually implemented it as intended? And it ends up in study after study, it was around only 5% actually implemented as intended. And when he looked at what that meant, implemented as intended, often it was only 30 minutes a week was what was intended. But even that was not happening. So we have, wonderful solutions, but they're not being implemented. And so I think actually that's a big risk right now. We could have amazing AI, but if it's not rolling out and being supported and implemented well, then it's not going to translate into the impact that we all hope it will be. And so that's where it's really the how. And in my work at Digital Promise, we saw this with our Verizon Innovative Learning Schools, hundreds of schools where we rolled out technology. And it was really the how that made the difference and where we got the impacts. So it's how learners, educators, organizations integrate and use AI is much bigger effect than which solution or which LLM or which technology, and I'll even say myself, I often find myself just focusing on the solutions or the technologies because it's fun and it's changing and whatnot, but actually it's the hard work of transforming organizations and providing those supports. And so this includes things like, how do you set up your data systems, right? With AI, what's important is AI doesn't have much context on where you're using it. And actually, that's the data that you have as an organization that provides the context to the AI to allow it to really perform well. So how do you set up your data systems to responsibly and appropriately, while protecting, and having appropriate governance around that, to share some of that data to provide the context so that it can really help you? How do you support and develop your staff? This goes to some of the what Sarah mentioned around letting them play with the AI, providing them AI literacy and some of the supports and guide rails and coaching to really develop their skills in using it. And it's really kind of this organizational transformation to what we call AI readiness. And organizations that are really able to integrate this and set up for this are really going to have a big impact. And I think part of this work was these 5 case studies. And when you look at organizations like Crisis Text Line, like Quill, like Beyond 12 and others that do this in a really thoughtful way, they really have transformed to incredible outcomes. And so how do we help the whole sector, organizations in this whole sector, do that? And that was really kind of the heart of this work. Because at the end of the day, I'll argue it's not about the solution. There won't be a silver bullet solution that's just going to take care of everything. And one other phenomenon is that there's just going to be more and more solutions out there. And I often say, I'm actually not as excited about AI solutions today. I'm really excited about the AI solutions in 2 or 3 years. And so how do you set yourself up as an organization? How do you build the capacity so that you can actually understand, procure, make good decisions? You can bring the context and the data that will help that system, those solutions perform well, and then really roll them out in ways that you can understand if they're working or not, and continuously improve on that. And that's really going to be the key to really large scale impact and equitable outcomes, leveraging AI. So with that, thank you. I'm really excited for today. And thank you for joining us. And we'll be diving into these topics across the
day. Hello, everyone. Vic and other Sarah, thank you so much for such a lovely introduction to the project. And now that Sarah and Vic have shared the big picture, why we're all here today, I'm going to dive into a little bit of the nitty-gritty of how we got to the Equitable AI Adoption Framework, and then how today will be structured to walk you through all of those different aspects of the framework. So, hopefully folks can see my slides. I see that we can. Fabulous. So, the fundamental question that animated this work is, what do nonprofits need to know to do AI well? So, to answer this question, we started out by researching what were the existing AI frameworks from everyone from the UN to Microsoft. There was a proliferation of corporate, of governmental AI frameworks. So we started with those frameworks, we extracted their insights, we developed in partnership with some fantastic subject matter experts our first hypothesis as to what nonprofits need to do AI well. And then we convened a big group of 13 nonprofit organizations who sent us both their tech people and their program people, and they said we were wrong. The commercial and governmental frameworks that we'd started with didn't really reflect what nonprofits on the ground needed to do AI well. So, leveraging the expertise of all of these organizations, which were themselves in their AI transformation journeys, we adapted those frameworks to reflect the needs of the field. And this wasn't a one-off, come and have a nice meeting, we'll buy you a coffee and tell us why our framework is right kind of engagement. This was months of long, in-depth sessions and a complete rewrite of the framework to really reflect what nonprofits needed. And in addition to the organizations that supported us, we were also guided by a design committee of experts in the field who provided that kind of expert level insight. And the result of all of that was a framework that reflects what nonprofits on the ground really need to think about when they're doing AI. So we know that people are a central component of AI implementation, and bringing that theme through our approach to the project. We also know that people don't learn in the same way. So to reflect that, we've produced a number of different ways to interact with this content. we've got the case studies that Vic mentioned, specific case studies with 5 organizations that are on the cutting edge of AI to see how the lessons from their journeys can be applied to the work of others in the field. We did webinars with the experts from those case studies. We've recorded a series of podcasts, which you'll see throughout the day, both in our resource section and shared in the links at each session. So you can listen to that if you are one of those people who prefers to listen than to read. And we produced the framework itself. And then, hopefully unsurprisingly, since you're here today, a virtual convening around all of this. So let's dive into the framework. One of the most central insights of the nonprofits that worked on this with us is that what organizations need to do AI well is different depending on how they're using AI. So the organization where somebody is using their personal ChatGPT account to improve the tone in their emails is in a very different place than the organization who is piloting, rolling out a student-facing chatbot to give college admissions counseling. Those are very different use cases. And so what you need to think about varies depending on those use cases. So we restructured the framework to reflect those differences. And then we come to the framework itself. Now, if you're a tech nerd like me, I'm a data scientist by training and come at this from that side, you might think that our framework is going to be all about tech, and there's no way to really participate in this if you're not the tech person at your organization. But that's not what we found at all. Instead, we found that the framework had kind of 3 main components, only one of which is tech. The first is policy. Both responsible AI use policies and data governance and risk really relate to the policy side of doing AI well. The second is people. As has been mentioned, I think multiple times already in this introduction, people are at the core of doing AI well, whether that's designing your AI projects to drive the outcomes your organization actually cares about, or that's engaging stakeholders correctly throughout the process, or that is addressing the culture of learning and change management within your organization to do AI effectively. People are really at the core of it. And then finally, yes, there is the tech piece. You need to have the right data, you need to have the right technology, and you need to monitor and assess your technology implementation over time to make sure that things don't go off the rails. But those 3 components of policy, people, and tech are all working together. So there's something for everybody, regardless of what your expertise or your focus is. There's a way for you to be involved in and drive AI adoption in your organization. So let's now that we've kind of oriented to the framework at a high level, let's do a quick, I'm cognizant of the time, overview of the structure of the day. So if you are one of those policy people, we have a couple of different sessions focused on policy elements, from data governance and risk, first to safe and fair practice, which is what we call our focus on responsible AI use policy, to a session on humans in high-risk scenarios and bias mitigation. If you are one of our people, we have a handful of different sessions on the human elements of AI implementation, starting with the first session of the day, starting right after this, which is the culture of learning and managing change, focusing on shared learning, change management, and continuous learning with some fabulous change management experts, and our very own Sarah Kelley. Then if you are one of those tech people, we also have some sessions focused on that, from data to technology implementation to monitoring and assessing your tech implementations. So those are our 2 channels of sessions that will be running in parallel to each other. So you won't be able to go to every session because, as you will astutely note, there is some overlap in the time, but you can pick between these 2 tracks what is the most interesting to you. In addition, we have a 3rd track in parallel, which are workshops. It's one workshop, there's just 2 times for it, so you can pick the one that doesn't overlap with the things that you're interested in. If you come to both, you will be bored because they are the same. And that's where we're going to really focus on making these ideas concrete. We're going to go through some real world examples and think about how this framework would apply in those circumstances to doing AI well. So that is kind of the overarching structure of the day. For each session, the structure of the session is going to start with a moderated panel, which is going to last for 45 minutes. And then is going to be followed by an opportunity to speak with the speakers directly in the lounge area. So at a conference, one of my favorite things to do is to come up after a session and talk to the presenters. That's obviously a little bit more difficult virtually. So that's what our lounge setup is for. So after the session, every speaker is going to go to a table in our lounge area, which I'm going to show you how to access in a moment. Each speaker will be at their own table, which will be labeled with their name. So you can say, oh, I was really interested in what Vic had to say. Let me go to the lounge table, find him, and talk to him. And that can kind of mimic that, that conference experience. So, so how do we make that happen? If you are in AirMeet, you will see that there are a number of different things that you're able to do. In your first sort of intro page, you can click on a session, and that will take you to the session. You won't have the go backstage button because you're not a speaker, but you'll have a button to go view that session. If instead you have finished with a session and you want to go to the lounge area, you will click the lounge button at the top left and enter into that lounge area, find the speaker that you're interested in, and go talk to them. And if you are interested in attending one of those workshops, you will click the workshop button up here and then join the main workshop table with me. And so if you do go to that workshop, we're going to focus on how those principles apply to real-world AI projects. We're going to think about picking an AI project that drives the outcome your nonprofit cares about, mitigating bias and privacy risk when doing so, and implementing ongoing monitoring to ensure quality. So I hope that everybody has a really fantastic day and really has a chance to experience some of the joy that I've experienced in this work, hearing from these really fantastic experts who are really thoughtful about AI, about nonprofits, and about equity. If you have questions, you can find us in the chat.